All right, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Business Exit and Acquisition Playbook. I'm Trent Lee, one of the top business brokers in the country, and today we're diving into one of the most important questions you'll ever ask as a buyer. Can I actually afford this business? And is this business a reasonable asking price? Here's the problem. Most buyers waste months chasing listings that never pencil out. They don't know how to quickly spot the fair market value, and so they get stuck analyzing dead deals instead of moving forward with good ones. And the reality is, sometimes, often, honestly, it's brokers who are driving bad deals into the marketplace because they don't know how to price them properly. They don't know how to value them properly. Most business brokers aren't business appraisers, so they do some really sloppy work. So, I'm going to give you the tips, the tricks, but in particular, the tools and the formulas and the data driven tools so you can look up the fair market multiple on a transaction that you're looking at. That way, is the fair market multiple for what the seller or the broker is asking on the listing you're looking for, is it reasonable? Or is it so far out of reality that one, you can't get approved for financing, or two, even if you did get approved for financing, it's just not a good deal. I'm going to show you how to analyze these deals in maybe 5 or 10 minutes so you can quickly calculate the fair market multiple, the fair market asking price, the DSCR, to see if the bank would even finance the transaction, and maybe, most importantly, spot when a seller is asking a price that's completely unreasonable so you don't waste any more time chasing down documents or asking questions. The goal here is speed and efficiency. Find good deals, focus on them, and quickly identify the bad deals and don't waste any time on them. So, by the end of this episode, you'll know how to separate the good deals from the bad in just a few minutes and never get stuck chasing an overpriced listing again. So, most people think I've got 10% down. So, with the SBA, I'm pretty good, right? Isn't that about what the SBA cares about? The answer is not quite. The SBA, yes, they want 10% down as a general rule. And we'll talk more about in other episodes about how you can do possibly less down than that. But generally, they're looking for a 10% equity injection just to enter the game. Yes, you usually need to have 10% down to qualify for an SBA loan. That's a safe bet. But the bank's looking for much more. They don't want to see that you can just scrape together a down payment. They want to know if you have what it actually takes to survive after closing. That's more than just the down payment. Think of the down payment like a ticket to Disneyland. It gets you in the gate, but if you don't have the money left over for food and parking and everything else that Disneyland charges you for, you're not really going to enjoy the trip. Same with buying a business. The down payment is just one step to get us into the gate, into the game. So, question to ask, why do banks care how much money I have left over after closing? If I've got the down payment, if the business cash flows, isn't that enough? The answer is really post-closing liquidity is one of the most important things that you can worry about or be aware of. Banks want to make sure that you've got some oxygen left over after closing, usually at least 3 to 6 months of personal expenses in the bank. If you cut it too close, you're just setting yourself up for a high risk potential of failure because the first year of owning a business is bumpy. Revenue might dip, a key employee could quit, a big customer might delay payments, and if you're out of cash for the first time your payroll is due, the whole deal starts to collapse or at least gets really tight. So the rule is keep a safety net. It's not just about the 10% down. It's about proving you won't suffocate once the deal closes. You got some oxygen, you got some wiggle room there. Now, we're going to talk about how to back into what your down payment should be and the money left over from a working capital standpoint. I'll show you a tool on how to calculate that. But a couple more questions just to lay the foundation, the framework here. How do banks actually measure if I can make the payment as a buyer? They look at something called DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. Now, don't let the name scare you. It's really simple. DSCR equals business cash flow divided by the loan payment. So let's do some simple math here. If the business makes $140,000 in cash flow and your loan payment to the SBA is $100,000 for the year, your DSCR is 1.4. That's like the sweet spot, 1.4 or above. SBA lenders will often go down to 1.25. In other words, they'll approve a deal if you can be above 1.25. Let me just give you my personal preference here. I can tell you from a personal standpoint, and the advice I'm giving to my buyers and my sellers as we're going through the process, 1.25 is cutting it way too close. That's essentially like, and this, my wife is not going to listen to this, so she won't hear, but that's like my wife who always drives around with the gas light on. Just, it's cutting it too close. You might make it, but one wrong turn and one delay, and you're stuck on the side of the road. So don't go down to 1.25. It's just cutting it way too close. Look for 1.4 or above. And again, the tool I'm going to show you here in a little bit will show you how to quickly calculate that. So, question that you need to ask yourself, how can I tell in 2 minutes if this deal even has a chance? So, there's a napkin test. Take the business's SDE, the seller's discretionary earnings, subtract your livable wage from it. And that's key. You don't want to forget that. That needs to come out of SDE, is your family finances requirement, the buyer's livable wage, and divide what's left over by the annual loan payments. If the number is 1.4 or higher, the deal passes the napkin test. If it's under 1.25, you're playing with fire. Don't even bother with it. It's not worth it. If it's in that 1.3 range, you can probably make some changes. You can't mess with a seller's discretionary earnings. You can't mess with your family finances. You don't want to change that if you know what your budget is. What you can change is the asking price, which then lowers your loan payment. So you can bring the asking price down, which will then bring up the DSCR to get to a 1.4 or higher. Remember, the formula here is SDE less your livable wage divided by loan payments. That's what equals DSCR. That's the fast filter. You don't need to run a 30 tab spreadsheet every time you do this. Just do a quick back of the napkin and see if the deal is worth digging deeper on. But what about you? What about the family? Don't you need to get paid too? Yes, exactly. That's why, and that's where so many buyers blow it, is they take SDE divided by the loan payments and they get an inflated DSCR, which is great. It looks good on paper. It's pretty math, but it's not realistic. You can't live unless you have a spouse or ancillary income and you need to take no income from this business. You can't really live and have no livable wage to pay yourself from operating the business. What you need to look at here is how much can you take? How much do you need to take? Now, if you need, let's just make up some numbers here. If your family finances need $100,000 a year just to pay the bills, but you have a spouse that makes $50,000 a year, then you only need to budget for $50,000 to take out of the business. So SDE minus 50,000 divided by the loan payments. If you have a need for 100,000 and you have a spouse that doesn't work, then you got to take SDE minus the $100,000 divided by the loan payment. So you got to factor that in. Make sure you're properly factoring in the family finances. The bank's also going to look at, it's called a stress test. They shave revenue by 10% and they bump expenses by 10%. Then they check DSCR again. If it passes, you're good. Now remember, we're looking for 1.4. That gives us a buffer room. The banks usually are only looking for 1.25. Some of them even go down to 1.2. So if you did just a quick stress test and you shaved revenue by 10% and you bumped up expenses by 10%, if you found a decent deal at 1.4, you're probably going to still pass the stress test. If not, then the deal is probably too small and it might start to get really tight. Why do they do this? Because honestly, reality happens. No business runs perfect. If your deal only works in a perfect world, you won't get funded. So ask yourself, if the sales drop and costs rise, does the business still work? If it doesn't, don't be afraid to walk away. There are so many good deals out there. So what I want to show you today, and what I want to walk you guys through today, is a framework that you won't forget. It's called the afford formula. Just if you can afford the business. And like all throughout this course, I'm always using acronyms. Afford is an acronym. A in afford is the amount down. Do you have at least 10% down? F in the afford formula is funds left over. Do you have post-closing liquidity somewhere between 3 to 6 months of personal living expenses? The second F in afford is the family paycheck. Did you subtract your livable wage before testing the DSCR? Or did you at least couple it with a spouse's income? Maybe you have rental income or you've got other income. You can add that in and then take the difference, but you have to factor in a family livable wage that you need to take and subtract that from SDE before you divide it by the annual debt payment. And O in the afford formula is the oxygen test. Does the DSCR still work after a stress test? Decrease revenue by 10%, bump up expenses by 10%. That's the stress test. Do you have enough oxygen to breathe and still be comfortable and still be above that DSCR? The next in the afford formula is the room to breathe. Is your DSCR at least 1.4 in the best case scenario? If so, it'll usually pass the stress test. If it's not, if you're cutting it too close and you're at a 1.3, in a perfect situation, once you apply the stress test, you're likely going to be below where you need to be for bank financing. And finally, the afford D is the deal structure. Seller notes and terms structured to make the deal bankable. We'll talk about seller notes and other things in different episodes. That's not the focus today. What I want to focus on now is how do you really determine a fair market price by looking up the multiple for the industry. This is where I can show you my screen and I can walk you through a formula that you've got access to, again, for free, that you can drive through this and really make some good decisions. So let me do a screen share and I'll walk you through this spreadsheet. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. It will give you so much the advantage and make life so much easier. Let me just walk you through this so you can see it and then play around with it. This will help you analyze deals. All right, let me walk you through how this spreadsheet works. It's really simple as long as you just know a couple key components. So let me show you. First off, we want to start with the NAICS code. So look here. This is the description of the NAICS code, but if you go down on this drop down, you can pick a bunch of codes in here. Now, it doesn't have to be the exact same code. You just want to get it generally close in the right industry. So this one, for my made-up demo example, is a commercial printing business. So feel free to scroll through here and pick, based on the business you're looking at buying, a NAICS code that's similar, at least in the same three, ideally the first 3 digits, maybe the first 4 digits. This doesn't have every single NAICS code available. There's tens of thousands of them. They change every couple of years. It's got the basic one so you can find something similar. So that's the first component, is get the right NAICS code. Now, next what you want to do is fill in some details here based on ideally the last couple years, in this case 24, 23, 22 tax returns. That's what you want to use ideally because that's what the lender's going to use. Rather than profit and loss statements, use the tax return. So this was straightforward. Just input the revenue, cost of goods, and total expenses. Anything that's grayed out is a field that you would edit. So focus on just the grayed fields. Everywhere, and we'll show these, are the only fields you need to worry about is the gray fields. Next is the add back section. So this is key right here, is adding back these expenses. Anything outside of these expenses, you have to have a really good reason why it's being an add back. Maybe there's a one-time expense that could fall under that the category of something not on this list. But anything outside of this list, I'd be careful about adding back. This is a pretty safe generic list that most SBA lenders will use. So I've just done some kind of made up add backs here. Let me show you now what you want to focus on. So this is the bottom line net income that should be on the tax returns. Right here, these items. Now with the add backs for each year, this calculates SDE right here and EBITDA for each of the 3 years. Now here's a couple of adjustments you need to make before you're really ready to determine is this or what's a fair market offer for this business. So first and foremost is the weighted average. We need to adjust this. So right now, here's my general rule of thumb. If the business is steady or trending up, like in this case, you can see it's trending up, EBITDA is trending up, then I do a weighted average over the last couple of years. Now, if the business is trending down, I put 100% weight in the most recent financials. Not even ideally 2024, but maybe I would get a trailing 12 months, and I would just change this so that 100% weight is in the most recent year. So that's the general rule of thumb. Now, this, I would just leave this at a 50-50 split between EBITDA and seller's discretionary earnings. This field right here is next what you need to focus on. What do you need as a buyer to support what the bank considers a livable wage? So this will change. Maybe you have no kids and you're single and you don't need a lot of money. Maybe you have a bunch of kids and you've got a large home, a large household, and the bank's going to need to know how much you generally need to support the family. In other words, how much income do you need to pull from this business before you can service the debt? So this is going to be a discretionary figure right here based on the individual buyer and what they need, what their family needs are. So for this example, I'm just using $85,000. Feel free to make any edits or changes based on your situation. And essentially what this is, so you know, EBITDA and seller's discretionary earnings is really, we've calculated seller's discretionary earnings, or we've calculated, let me put it this way, we've calculated SDE less whatever figure you're putting here to calculate EBITDA. So if you needed less money, 65,000, or 650,000 is not right, but 65,000, that's going to change. If you need more money, if you need 100,000, that's going to change these figures. So that's a couple items. Now here's the last kind of component that you need to focus on to calculate this figure right here, fair market multiple. This is what's going to really control the fair market valuation of the business, the asking price or the fair market value of what that business is, which then in turn helps us calculate the debt service coverage ratio. So watch these multiples right here. What we want to do is now compare this. So if we're looking at a average EBITDA of 387 and 487 SDE, look down here, this comparable chart. This is where you want to do a little bit of research here. So there's thousands of data sets in the back end of this Excel spreadsheet. So based on this NAICS code right here, which we selected up here, I've got not listings, not businesses for sale, but actual closed data points here, 197 closed transactions. And we're pulling data from the chart here below. Now, this is the key. You want to rank how does the business you're looking at buying, in other words, the business we put the details all up here, how does that compare to the 197 businesses? It's one thing to average it by general NAICS code, but as you can see, the top, the bottom 1% of businesses, they're pretty small. I mean, look at this. They're doing, that doesn't even support one person hardly. Larger businesses up here are going to have a higher multiple. So right here is the SDE and the adjusted EBITDA figures. You want to find where that falls within the data table. So let's say 487, 387, roughly EBITDA. So right kind of in here for EBITDA, and a little bit lower for sellers' discretionary earnings. Or I said that backwards. SDE versus EBITDA. You get the point. You're trying to find the data set that's appropriate is kind of right in this general range, 70 to 90%. So here's what you want to do. You want to update this rank right here to the correlating data set that you found of where that meets on the table. Now watch what happens to these multiples. They change. So let's say you wanted to kind of compare this to 70%. You see that? That changed and the valuation changes. Where that data is coming from is this line item right here, this 70%. So we've got a 3 multiple on SDE and a 4.18 multiple on seller's discretionary earnings if we're using kind of the 70% rank so that the business is compared to the right general size and industry. Now, if you were dealing with a much smaller business and it had smaller data points here, you'd mark this to 35% and it changes the multiples, which change the valuation. Here's another couple other helpful items here. So this is the percentage of revenue of the general data set. This is the percentage of revenue, EBITDA, seller's discretionary earnings, profit margins based on the actual business we're looking at, which in this case it's made up. So you can't put a lot of weight into it, but you should just double check your numbers. So look at this right here. This business in my made up example has a 13% SDE margin and a 10% EBITDA margin. The industry average is a little bit higher. So that tells me, you at least need to be aware of it, that they're operating this business probably lower than industry standards. Something's off. That presents an opportunity for you as a buyer to get in there and fix. Maybe cost of goods are too high. Maybe payroll is too high. Maybe rent's too high, whatever it happens to be. That gives you at least a component where you can go and figure out, okay, where are they overspending to make this business operate under industry standard margins. That's an opportunity for you to pick that up, get it to where it should be, and then increase the bottom line, which then increases your valuation. Okay, last item on here is this test right here. And what I really care about is this figure right here being in green. I at this point, based on this price at this rank, which we know that's probably too low. We were earlier kind of in the 70 to 90% range. So let's put it at 75%. Increases the valuation based on the multiples. Now, this is still green, which is a key indicator that a 1.3 debt service coverage ratio or higher is a pretty good indication, as long as you have put accurate information here, you haven't gotten too aggressive with the add backs here, you've got a 1.3 debt service coverage ratio, which is a pretty good indication you can go to the SBA and get this financed. And this just kind of walks you through the general math on how that works. That's really about it. It's a pretty simple spreadsheet, but it will allow you to go through and calculate the fair market valuation on the business you're looking at buying in roughly 5 or 10 minutes. You should be able to do real quick math and quickly be able to determine, is this a good business I should be looking at? Or, for example, if you were looking at this business and it was for sale for $2 million, for example, you've got pretty good data justification for why the business is not worth $2 million. That's a good indication that the seller or the broker has overvalued the business, and it's not worth you spending too much time on because the business is overvalued. Unless you can go to the broker or the seller and say, look, based on 197 closed transactions, the fair market multiple that you should be asking is right here. You're asking for too much, and see if they're open to kind of come down to reality. If they're not, then just pass. Just go on. Move on to the next business. The key here is being able to quickly determine, is the business you're looking at buying is it a fair price? If it's close, based on the data set that you have here, it's probably worth then taking the next step. If it's not, then you can quickly determine that this business is not worth what they're asking for, pass, move on, and go to the next until you find the right business. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks. Take care.